This is Nightly Business Report with Bill Griffith and Sue Herrera.
We need to take a more proactive role and a broader view of our responsibility.
Facebook CEO acknowledges missteps as lawmakers press him on the company's handling of user data, and the stock gets a lift.
Sigh of relief. The Dow rallies more than 400 points after the president of China strikes a conciliatory tone. But are his comments being misinterpreted?
Equal pay day. Why is there such a big gap between the salaries of men and women? And what is being done to close it? Those stories and much more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, April 10th.
And we do bid you a good evening, everybody. Welcome. There was drama in Washington and on Wall Street today. The CEO of Facebook made his first ever appearance before Congress. We will have more on that in a moment. But we begin with the strong rally in the stock market today. The major averages all charged higher right at the opening bell, never looked back, after the president of China soothed concerns, at least for now, about a trade war with the United States, the very same issue that's been causing intense volatility in the market in recent weeks. Here are today's closing numbers. The Dow finishing with a gain of 428 points, back above 24,000. The NASDAQ was up 143. The S&P added 43 as well.
And now to Facebook, which was at the center of the drama in Washington. CEO Mark Zuckerberg faced more than 40 lawmakers in a crowded hearing room on Capitol Hill. Walking into the room, the notoriously camera-shy Zuckerberg faced a barrage of cameras clicking to capture every movement as he sat down. Members of the Senate Judiciary and Commerce Committees peppered him with questions about his company's handling of data of tens of millions of Americans. He looked serious, and he started by apologizing. Investors, though, didn't flinch, sending the stock up 4.5% to its best day in 2 years. Julia Boorstin is covering the hearing for us from Capitol Hill. Good evening, Julia.
Good evening to you, Sue. Mark Zuckerberg taking the stand for about 4 hours as 43 senators each took their 5 minutes to ask him questions and follow up with more questions after his answers. Now, Zuckerberg stressed throughout his questions that he is taking responsibility for Facebook's failures to protect its users' data, and it's making a range of different changes. He apologized repeatedly, prompting this question from Senator Thune.
How is today's apology different, and why should we trust Facebook to make the necessary changes to ensure user privacy and give people a clearer picture of your privacy policies?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have made a lot of mistakes in running the company. I think it's pretty much impossible, I believe, to start a company in your dorm room and then grow it to be at the scale that we're at now without making some mistakes. And because our service is about helping people connect and information, those mistakes have been different in how we try not to make the same mistake multiple times.
Zuckerberg says he believes Facebook is safe to use and that the company gives users the choices and the different tools to decide how they want to share the content they're sharing, the content they're producing. He says that Facebook is working to have protections above and beyond what the law requires, but he also noted that he is definitely open to regulation.
My position is not that there should be no regulation. Okay. I think the internet is increasingly
important. Do you embrace
important.
regulation?
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or not.
But you as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right?
I think that they get things right.
Have you ever submitted? That's true. So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you.
The question and answer session ranging on everything from hate speech to election manipulation to whether Facebook violated its promises and commitments to the Federal Trade Commission. Zuckerberg said they did not break any of their promises to the FTC. And on a number of counts, Zuckerberg said he'd follow up with more details to Senate staff. Sue, back over to you.
And we await that very much. Thank you, Julia. Julia Boorstin on Capitol Hill. Bill?
Now, one reason why there's so much focus on Facebook is because of its rapid growth. Just consider, a decade ago, few people had heard of it. Today, its influence in our lives and in the stock market is staggering. Facebook has 2 billion monthly users around the globe. Think about that. That is 4 times the population of the United States. Here in the U.S., roughly 2/3 of all adults use Facebook. And with the exception of YouTube, no other major social media platform comes close to Facebook in terms of usage. Also, according to Pew Research, nearly half of American adults get their news from Facebook. And when it comes to market influence, Facebook is currently the world's 6th largest publicly traded company with a market value of more than $460 billion.
Let's turn now to Silicon Valley veteran and an early investor in Facebook, Roger McNamee. He has been publicly sharply critical of the social network. Let's get his thoughts on Facebook and what any future regulation might mean for it and others in the sector. He is the managing director at Elevation Partners. Always a pleasure to have you here. Welcome, Roger.
Sue, it's so great to see you and Bill again. It's been too long.
First, let me start with your reaction to what you heard on Capitol Hill. We have another session for Mr. Zuckerberg tomorrow morning Eastern time, but did anything that you heard from him today change some of the criticisms that you've been so public with?
So the real problem here is that Facebook has done many things in its business that were designed to maximize growth and profitability that frankly ran contrary both to the public interest and to the interest of users. And what the hearing exposed was that it's not one problem we're dealing with. It's not 2, it's 10 or 15 or 20. You know, the company has been careless in the handling of user data. It has been incredibly aggressive at flaunting past practices about how you deal with data. It has frankly ignored regulation. It has ignored criticism. It has worked with people that it knew to be bad actors. It has operated in governments outside the U.S. doing things to their citizens that you would never do anywhere in the United States. So I look at this hearing as being an opportunity for senators to show off and an opportunity for Mark to frankly, look better than people would have expected, but it solves nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, the company, I think, now is too big to be managed by this team, and I don't candidly think there's anyone on the outside who could come in and manage it, which makes me think the company's just too big.
Roger, let me ask you this, and let's make it meaningful to investors out there. Clearly, some regulations are going to come out of these hearings at some point. Do you think that will stunt the growth, not only of Facebook, but other social media companies? One Wall Street analyst has said that he thinks this could signal the end of the golden age for social media. What do you think?
I actually think that that should be a priority of the process. The idea here right now is that we have 4 gigantic social media companies who dominate the internet in ways we have never seen before. And candidly, they're stunting the growth of startups throughout the country, frankly, around the world. They're blocking off lots of new opportunity. And I don't see any way to get our entrepreneurial economy back on track without stopping, to some degree, the growth of the giants. And I think there's a good example in the past, 1956 with AT&T, when that company was threatening the emergent computer industry. And there was a government consent decree that caused them to not expand into computers, and which resulted in the free licensing of their patents, including the transistor, which is what created the massive boom that we think of as Silicon Valley today. I think we should do that again.
If you are an individual investor who holds Facebook, you mentioned the fact that the company is too big, which opens the door to a variety of remedies, certainly. What do you do with your Facebook shares if you're the individual investor?
Well, so I am an individual investor in Facebook. It is still, Sue, by far the largest individual position I have. And I've held on to it candidly because I felt that I was not trying to be a critic. I was trying to actually be supportive and constructive in this whole conversation. And so I've been banged around pretty badly in recent weeks. And my basic point to people is this: Facebook is the greatest advertising business ever created. If there is no regulation, it will continue to grow like crazy. I think that is actually not the best thing for the country. It's not the best thing for the world. I think the best thing for the world would be to restrain Facebook very significantly and force them to be more responsible. I actually don't think that would be the end for the stock. It might be the end for this business model, but they have huge businesses like their marketplace, like Messenger, where there are opportunities for monetization they've never taken advantage of. So I don't actually think that we have to cripple Facebook. In fact, I don't want to, because I love the product. Right. I just think they're not behaving responsibly.
We will have you back very soon.
I
Roger,
hope so.
Definitely, you can count on it. Roger
Thanks,
McNamee
Roger.
with Elevation Partners. Bill?
So as we mentioned earlier, stocks rose today on comments made by China's President Xi Jinping. Now, he was speaking at a global forum in Asia where he announced plans to open his country's economy by, among other things, reducing tariffs, not increasing them, on imported vehicles. His remarks were surprising, given the escalating trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. But is the market getting his remarks wrong? Eunice Yoon is in Beijing for us tonight.
President Xi Jinping pledged a more open China and said the new measures would be turned into a reality sooner rather than later. The market seemed to like President Xi's softer tone in the ongoing trade dispute with the United States. However, most of the people that I spoke to today here said that they were underwhelmed by the Chinese president's speech. That's because these are old promises or policies that are currently underway. The decision to lift foreign equity caps was announced at the end of last year and is already in motion. Others, like the lowering of auto tariffs, are not meaningful since most American cars that are sold in China are made in China. On easing restrictions in manufacturing or enforcing intellectual property, there were few details and only vague timeframes. And most importantly, President Xi's speech didn't address a core U.S. concern, China's industrial policies. So it remains to be seen whether or not President Xi's speech will be enough to appease the Trump administration. There was some good news, though, for American companies. Fund managers say J.P. Morgan and BlackRock are looking to expand their asset management businesses here and could benefit. Insurance folks expect big changes in the life insurance industry. Out of American companies, they say MetLife is one of the few with its toe in this market. But Tesla is seen as the biggest potential winner. Tesla depends on imports, it doesn't manufacture here, and the tariff on Tesla cars here is 25%. So if it drops significantly, analysts say, that could be a game changer. Welcome announcements by President Xi, but not enough to excite most international businesses here. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Eunice Yoon in Beijing.
By the way, she mentioned the insurers. They rose on China's plan to speed up the opening of that country's insurance sector, and MetLife did say it is encouraged by the president's remarks and is looking forward to seeing the words put into action.
President Trump thanked the Chinese president in a tweet. He wrote, quote, "Very thankful for President Xi of China's kind words on tariffs and automobile barriers. Also, his enlightenment on intellectual property and technology transfers. We will make great progress together," end quote.
Now, while investors seem to be less concerned about the state of trade, at least for today, the market's attention will soon shift to earnings. Earnings season arrives later this week at a critical time for the bull market. Bob Pisani has more from the New York Stock Exchange tonight.
Earnings to the rescue. Traders are relieved there's a chance to change the conversation from the chaos of trade wars to the calm of earnings and revenues. The numbers are phenomenal. The S&P earnings for the first quarter were expected to be up 10% in October. Then they went to 12% in January. Now they're up over 18%, and they may go to 20%. You don't see earnings double in 6 months very often. The two biggest sectors, tech and financials, will see outsized gains of 23 and 24% respectively. Remember, together they're 40% of the S&P 500, so this really matters. Traders want to hear what corporations are going to be doing with their newfound money that they're getting from the tax cuts. Early signs have been encouraging. Bank of America looked at the announced spending plans of 150 companies about a month ago. They found a mix of one-time bonuses, expanding buybacks and dividends, and more CapEx spending. Traders are pinning their hopes for a rally on two issues. First, a surge in buyback announcements. 2017 saw about $500 billion in announced buybacks. This could go to $800 billion in 2018. Share buybacks reduce a company's outstanding shares, resulting in most cases to an increase in earnings per share. More important is hopes for more capital expenditures. 40% of companies that made comments on their spending plans mentioned increased capital expenditures. There's a very strong correlation between increasing capital expenditures and stock rallies, particularly capital goods companies like techs and industrials and energy. Of course, this could all be upended by trade war headlines, another topic expected to be addressed by CEOs as well. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bob Pisani at the New York Stock Exchange.
And it's time to take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. Goldman Sachs has been given an outperform rating in new coverage over at Bernstein. The analyst there notes that Goldman's investment banking business is now the primary driver of revenue, not its trading business. The price target is $300. Goldman Sachs rose more than 1% to $256.57. In the same note, though, Bernstein rates Morgan Stanley underweight in new coverage of that stock. The analyst cites a slowdown in lending revenue growth. The target price is $51 a share. Shares of Morgan Stanley, though, in an overall up market, were up almost 1.5% to $54.14.
And NVIDIA shares were upgraded to overweight from equal weight at Morgan Stanley. The analyst there says the semiconductor company will be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the movement toward machine learning. Price target remains at $258. NVIDIA shares rose nearly 6% to $227.91. And Morgan Stanley also upgraded shares of Seagate Technology to overweight from equal weight. The firm sees Seagate benefiting from increased demand for artificial intelligence. Price target was raised to $72, and Seagate shares finished up more than 5% to $59.35.
Still ahead, are you looking for a new car? Well, if you are, there's a greater chance that it might have been imported from Mexico.
To the economy now, and a closely watched gauge of inflation. That would be the Producer Price Index, which is a measure of the prices that businesses receive for their goods and services. And it rose by 0.3%, more than expected. The rise came from a sharp increase in food costs and strong price growth in the services sector. The report is the latest sign that inflation pressures may be building in the economy, and that's certainly something the Federal Reserve will be paying close attention to in the coming months.
Well, don't look now, but oil prices are moving higher. Today's rise is in part because of a growing confidence that the U.S. and China will resolve their trade dispute, and also on rising tensions in the Middle East. Domestic crude rose more than 3% to settle above $65 a barrel.
A management shakeup could be coming to Volkswagen. The German automaker is reportedly going to replace its CEO with the head of its core band. The departure of Matthias Müller is being viewed as another attempt to move past the lingering effects of that 2015 diesel emission scandal. There's been speculation in Germany that VW was slow to act as the scandal began to surface.
As talks between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement continue, new data shows Mexico is still shipping cars and trucks to the U.S. at a pretty steady rate, and it's expected to pick up even more momentum this year. Phil LeBeau reports.
The trains loaded with cars and trucks seem to stretch for miles. They're headed from Mexico to the U.S. Last quarter, shipments of Mexican-made autos to the United States climbed more than 5% to a record high of almost 600,000 vehicles, making up almost 15% of what was sold in U.S. dealerships. Most buyers are likely unaware they could be buying a model built in Mexico. Two of the most popular pickups, the Chevy Silverado and Ram 1500, are both built south of the border. While President Trump has threatened to slap a tax on Mexican-made vehicles, many in the auto industry doubt that will ever happen. Instead, they believe negotiators will successfully rework the NAFTA agreement, which could change some of the requirements for Mexican-made vehicles, but is not likely to lead automakers to slow down assembly lines in that country. Last year, Mexico built almost 4 million vehicles, with more than half of those being shipped north of the border.
It's easy to think Mexico's auto industry is growing simply because of demand in the U.S., but Mexico is also exporting more vehicles to other countries like Germany, Brazil, and China. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Chicago.
Sprint and T-Mobile reportedly renew merger talks, and that is where we begin tonight's Market Focus. Several months after previous talks fell apart, the two telecom companies are apparently taking another shot at reaching a deal, according to the Wall Street Journal. This would be the company's third attempt at a combination. Shares of Sprint jumped by 17% to $6.02, and shares of T-Mobile rose more than 5% to $63.13. American Airlines is raising the low end of its unit revenue outlook for this quarter. But the lift in revenue guidance was not as much as some had been hoping for. The airline also affirmed its earnings guidance for the whole year. Shares were down nearly 5% in an otherwise big up day at $47.46. And United Continental said that traffic rose by 6.5% in March compared to a year ago. The airline also said that its on-time performance improved. Perhaps investors were looking for more, though. Shares of United also finished lower, down about 1% to $67.59. Sue?
Bill Tupperware said a drop in sales would cause earnings and revenue this quarter to disappoint. The storage products maker also said higher tax rates were having an impact on its financial performance. Shares of Tupperware were off more than 11% to $41.74. Auto systems maker Tenneco said it was buying Peer Federal Mogul from Icon Enterprises for more than $5 billion. Tenneco says it will separate into two publicly traded companies following that deal. The companies will focus on powertrain products and auto parts. Tenneco shares rose 4% to $57.82.
To the housing market now, where a new report shows that roughly 1 in 5 conventional mortgage loans went to borrowers who are spending roughly 45% of their monthly incomes on mortgage payments and other debts. That according to CoreLogic, and that is the highest proportion since the housing crisis. Economists say that the increase in debt reflects rising home prices in relation to wages.
Well, it's no secret that fewer buyers are able to afford the homes that they want, especially in their desired locations. And this is happening barely a decade after that worst housing crisis in history. And as Diana Olick tells us, workers in certain jobs are being hit the hardest.
If you're house hunting this spring, you already know the competition out here is rough. Very few listings and very high prices. And for some workers, affording a home anywhere close to their job is getting increasingly difficult. Teachers, first responders, restaurant workers, and surprisingly, computer programmers have the hardest time affording a home near their jobs. This, according to a new study by Trulia, a real estate listing company. In tech-heavy California, where tech workers make six-figure salaries, very few can afford to buy a home. In San Francisco, programmers can afford just 5% of the homes for sale. And in San Jose, barely 12%, according to Trulia. Median home prices in both cities are well over $1 million. But it's not just in California. Barely half of programmers in Chicago, Charleston, South Carolina, Minneapolis, and Newark, New Jersey can afford to buy the median-priced home. The numbers are even worse in Portland, Oregon, and Miami. But teachers really bear the brunt of the challenges. Their salaries are not increasing at anywhere close to the gains in home prices. The number of homes affordable to them is dropping dramatically, down over 20% in cities like Tacoma, Washington, Colorado Springs, and even the relatively affordable Indianapolis. The problem is that home prices are rising fastest at the low end of the market. That's where there is now most demand and least supply. That leaves more workers having to travel farther out from their jobs to find affordable housing, meaning ever longer commutes. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Diana Olick in Washington.
And coming up, closing the pay gap, why men and women don't earn the same salary for the same job. A federal appeals court has ruled that employers cannot pay women less than men for the same work if it's based on the woman's previous salaries. Now, the court said that pay differences based on prior salaries are inherently discriminatory. The lawsuit involved a female California math consultant who sued Fresno County Office of Education after she found out that her male colleague with the same title was paid a higher salary.
And finally tonight, today is Equal Pay Day, a day meant to symbolize how far into the year a woman must work in order to earn the same amount that a man earned the previous year. Wage disparity has become part of the national conversation, and so we asked Leslie Picker to take a look at the nation's gender pay gap.
The figure most commonly cited is 20%. Women's median earnings are about 20% below that of men's. That 20% adds up over time. It equates to about $400,000 in lost wages over the course of a career. For millions of women, pay parity would bring them above the poverty level. That's according to a new study published today by Lean In and SurveyMonkey. It also found out that about a third of people did not realize the pay gap exists. President of LeanIn.org, Rachel Thomas, says that gender bias is to blame for much of the wage gap.
We asked Americans why they think there's a pay gap, and 60% said they thought it was because of sexism or unconscious bias, and they're right. A big piece of this is what's happening in the workplace day to day, which is why this isn't just about awareness. It's about a call to action for companies to level the playing field. Women have less access to mentors and sponsors. They're promoted more slowly. There's bias in the performance review process that has an impact on their pay.
But bias does not explain the whole story. A large explanation for the gender gap is due to the idea that predominantly male fields, think construction and transportation, garner higher earnings than predominantly female fields like education and administrative support. Activists have called for raising the minimum wage as a way to help bridge that divide. Another reason is the so-called motherhood penalty. Studies have found that employers are less likely to hire mothers than fathers, even if they have the same level of experience. Some companies, such as Salesforce, have taken it upon themselves to investigate the disparities within their workforce. Tamara Mellon, the co-founder of Jimmy Choo, says that's an important step toward parity.
I think transparency, looking at the data is really the only way we're going to figure out how to do this. And calling on companies to do internal analysis, I think that's the way forward.
The wage gap has narrowed in recent years, but still persists. At the current rate of change, women would not reach pay parity with men until 2119, more than a century from now. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Leslie Picker.
And that's it for us tonight.
Good night. We'll see you tomorrow.